This is an idea that actually John Drew brought up, that maybe we should grab Bobby Marsolais, film this. Thank you, Alan McRae, for all this fancy camera work. This is going to be for posterity. So not only the memorabilia, but Bobby's going to take us a walk through the history of Conomo. So without further ado, Bobby Marsolais.
Decided to do this. He said, how much time have I got to call? Well, I think I'm down to about 15 or 30 minutes right now. And I think he forgot that I'm 87 years old, and how the hell am I going to condense it down to 15 or 20 minutes? I mean, it would take me that long to tell you about when I escorted Betty Cuthbertson, Marshall Crossan, to the Melrose High Senior Prom in 1951. But I'll do my best. Actually, there's two of us that have been here the longest at Conomo Point. There's some that are older than I. We love those guys. Nancy Lemke was brought down here in 1933 when she was born. I came down in 1934 when I was born. I always called myself, I was adopted out of the little wanderers home over in Jamaica Plain, and I was adopted by a family named Marsolais. So I always called myself a French Canadian because that's where grandfather and grandmother were from. And then Julie, my daughter, and I did the 23andMe, and well, what happened was it appears that there was a hot-blooded Italian dude that got mixed up with an English-Irish lady, and this is the result. I'm going to start, what I think we'll do here is I'm going to lead you right in from Harlow Street and Route 128, just to tell you what was there that you see today, but you didn't see in those days. And anyone that doesn't know, 128 was 133. 128 ended at US Route 1, and they would do a little section at a time and open it up. So from time to time, you had to go through Danvers, you had to go to Beverly, you had to go to Hamilton, and you worked your way down here. Saturday and Sunday night, a madhouse. The cars from Essex Center were all the way up past Conomo Point of Harlow Street and up to Summer Street and Bray Street, way up the line. It was a busy place. Our first house down here, the Marsolais house, we rented. The house that now is owned by John and Christine Drew. We were there from 34 to 1940. In 1940, the fellow that owned it, Dr. Norris, came to my dad. He says, I don't have any more use for this house. He says, you want to buy it? How much do you want? He says, I want $2,500. My father's, what? You think money grows on trees? My mother said, wait a minute, I want to own a house down here. And I have a picture of no, it's not the first house. I've been in so many houses around, 2 houses. And she said, I want a house down here. And he disappeared one Saturday. He came back in the late in the afternoon. We own a house. Where is it? So I'll be back. He took her out behind the house, and she looked over there. 1 story, vines all over the place, falling down. There was a pump in the sink for the water and an outhouse out in the back. And he was so proud of himself, I paid $300 cash. We sat there for a year or so, and my mother said, I can't sit on this front porch. There's a garage in front of me on the lot that we're on now. And it was a 2-car garage. It's in my view. Go tell the guy that owns it, you'll give him $200 for it. And he disappeared again on a Saturday. He came back that night. We owned the garage. How much did you pay for it? $500. I told you to only pay $200. And he says, yes, but I own the house too. We looked at it for a few years. People like Skeet and Madge Richardson rented it for a while. And eventually my mother says, I'd like to to move over there. That's where the show starts, we were there. Well, anyway, we're back out to 128. And right there, 128, Harlow Street, coming in Harlow Street, there was a little triangular of land. And you were supposed to drive in on the Gloucester side and come out on the Essex side. But we had a lot of hot rods around here in those days too, and a lot of them liked to just go right up the Essex side, whether they were coming, going, whatever. And it was invariably, you ran into another car, you ran into a truck, or you ran into the police, which was even worse. Right across the street, before we leave it, where the Red Barrel is, that was an ice cream shop called The Bucket. And The Bucket was owned by Buzz and Marge Gardner from that's quite all right. Where was I? Buzz and Marge Gardner. And it was not unusual for 8, 10, 12 of us to walk up at least once a week and go out there and get an ice cream. Anyway, you came in, the pump station wasn't there. That's why the triangle and both sides. There weren't any houses on the right. There was a couple on the left. They're still there. They look a little better today. Lufkin Street, then Sam Warren's place with his 80 acres on the left. His mother hadn't built her house across the street. You get to the corner of Concord, Powell, and Conomo Point Road. There was one house there owned by Laurie Hanson today. The other house, the small one, Kevin Newton's, that was not there at that particular time. There was no driveway up to the conference center because there was no conference center. You came along Conomo Point Road, you could see in among the trees because there wasn't as much weeds and foliage as there is today. Derek Brown and April, at the end of the conference center land, they weren't there. A lot of Sally Court, the next driveway, they weren't there. Lufkin Point Road was there. They didn't have the big pillars, nothing to announce that was Lufkin Point and private way. In you go, and all of the houses were down at the end, out by the water, and maybe a couple right behind it too. It didn't come until later that Bob Swan and Mary Swan bought 20 acres over there, subdivided 6 ways. Number 1 is Chris and Julie Boros, who just happen to be related to Joanne. And then 5 other lots, all 6 lots having access to Walker Creek. Doesn't help you much at low tide, but high tide is really nice in there. You come over the hill after you leave Lufkin Point Road, come over the hill. Up until then, all the telephone poles are about 6 feet from the side of the road. But after you come over the next, just before you hit the freeway there, the telephone lines start to move inland. But if you interpolate in your mind 6 feet back, you'll see that that was the old road when I was growing up here. That was the old road, and there was a nice hump in front of the poor farm. The poor farm was set up to do the poor and the indigent of town for a long, long time. And then during World War, I want to say just after maybe World War II, they started bringing some of the inner city kids down to Conomo Point. And of course they wanted to come down and take a swim. Unfortunately, most of them were black, and there were people in town and the Conomo community that said, we got to do something about that. And they actually made the group that brought these people down, the kids down, they made them, and you can see the remains today, just to the left of Sumac Drive in the gully there. They dug a little swimming pool, but they didn't count on the fact that the only time there really got any water in it was when you had a flood tide. And the kids didn't like standing in the muck. It was really, and so they had to make a decision with whoever, and And the deal was they would let the kids come down and swim after 5 o'clock at night. So that was kind of sad, but that's the way things were in those days. The house was, the poor farm was then bought by Jack Emerson, and had various things in it from time to time. The police had a firing range there at one point, and you may remember that the movie Mermaids some of it was filmed there. Cher and Winona Ryder and Christina Ricci. And we had a couple of our would-be electricians from Conomo, Chris Marsolais and Steve Gammons, who did some wiring for that movie. And I'm sure they will take the credit today. What else happened there, as I recall? Nothing. Let's move on.
Item one.
Yeah, fire one. First house you see on the right was the only house that you see on the right. Now there's 3, but there was only one. That was owned by a fellow I didn't know his last name, but we called him Bill the Greek. And he had a variety store right across from the old fire station, right where the bank is today. And you went in front and you saw all the the eggs and the newspapers and the this and the that. And then you went through an archway out in the back, and there was beer and wines, and that was good. But anyway, he decided to open up a little store at this first one. That's the one that Shane Venetia's bought, the first one on the right. And you could go in there and get a few items. I guess he was open for 3 or 4 years before he found out that wasn't too profitable. Across the street, by the way, there was no Sumac Drive, there was no Town Farm Road, there was no Coxwell Road. There were 3 houses in there. The first one that the Markowitzes are in now, that was the Frasers lived there, and the Benders. The second house was a clammer by the name of Dick Parks, and the third one, I'm not sure exactly who was there, but before too long, Janet Landry's stepfather Earl owned it, and that's where I came in. You get to the corner of Robbins Island Road. There was a family there where the Dolphs and Peter and Jane are. That was owned by a family by the name of Netto. And Mr. Netto had a bad back. He had a bad 2 legs, knees. My father was a doctor. He said, "Can you help me out?" And my father would go up on the porch and spread them out, and whatever he spread them out on him. And Mr. Netto was very grateful. Turns out he was in the black market, and all of a sudden, once a week, we'd get a cardboard box on the house. At the house, and it had a hamburger or steaks, which you couldn't get there in World War II. So that was good, but he never took credit for it. Everybody else's house along the way, the same, not any new ones, but the same. And then as you went out onto Robbins Island, the mound there where Romano's house is, that was not there, that was flat. But on the left-hand side, going out right across from Boot Rock, if you haven't heard of Boot Rock, that's Judy Riggs can tell you that's at high tide when the water was over the road. You had to leave your shoes and boots there and go back and get them later after you waded out to your house. But across the street, halfway out to Robbins Island, there was a house on stilts. There was a wooden walkway that went out. Everything was kind of falling apart. But that house eventually got moved over to, I don't know whether they just didn't tear it down and start over, but they moved it from there to Cogswell Road, and that's the house today that's between Pat and Lori Keller. It's still looking to get finished. But that's another story. All right, we got to get back on the road here. We're back to Beach Circle, except Beach Circle wasn't named Beach Circle. That was still like Conomo Point Road. In 1937, And it's a good thing my father and my mother left me some good notes, because in 1937, I was only 3 years old. But we had a parade from Conomo Point over to what was called Conomo Village. And so here's the big sign at the start of the parade: the Gold Coast greets the villages. We used to be called the Gold Coast. Not very long, and it never stuck. I'm not sure why. And they had some. There were 7 houses as around today. There were 7 there. Maybe there was 5 there. And we had food. We had refreshments. Judge Hill lived in one of those houses there. He had some speeches. Our association had some speeches, and during this time, an old pal of mine, Eddie Pride, from Conomo Point, the Prides lived in what is now Thea, Wendell's house. And Eddie was about 6, I was 3, but he used to lead me astray once in a while, and this was one of the times. After the speeches were over, they were going down to the corner of Beach Circle where the bulletin board is, and we had a nice big beautiful sign, black antique, gold letterings with the last names of everybody that was on the lived in houses there. Eddie and I were bored with speeches. Janet Davis told me this story. And so he and I wandered down to the sign, which was covered with a blanket, and then there was going to be a big to-do when they ripped the blanket up. Eddie and I found some sticks to take down the blanket, and we're up there playing. All of a sudden, Janet Davis appears, and she says, "I called you bad boys," and then I went and got my mother and your mother, and we couldn't move from their side for the rest of the show. Good times. 1937, incidentally, was, and we have the articles of incorporation back there on the table, but that was the year Conomo Point incorporated, and on that incorporation, there were some familiar names. Old Pride was on there, the Davises and Sandy Osborne, relations, all along. That's what I love about this place, I grew up here, my kids grew up here, and my grandkids are growing up here. I love it. His brother, Edwin Pride, was one of the incorporators, as was Vincent Farnsworth. Nobody ever called him Vincent. I didn't even know what his name was for a while. It was always Grampy Farnsworth. The 4th one was his next door. He was in the old Davis Cottage. And then next door was Frank Hawkson. For some reason, his nickname was Bing Bing, but you didn't dare to call him that in front of him. I still don't know that. I was too young. And the 5th one was a fellow by the name of Jim Watson. Not many people remember Jim Watson at all. He was in the house that's now occupied by Peter Marshall and the ex-Crosses. That house burned in one of the fires, and he decided not to rebuild, and that's when Bill Cuthbertson took over that property. All right, that's the. Now let's go around the corner let's stop at Clammis Beach first. Clammis Beach is all filled in. When you leave the road, it used to dip down immediately. And on the left side, there was this huge granite underneath it. Once you were uncovered, the only way you could drive your truck or car down the Clammis Beach was hug the rocks, and then out you came. On the other side, the row of rocks in the middle, they weren't there. The row of rocks on Philip Mengus' side, they weren't there. It dipped in pretty good on the other side, and it was full of a yellow clay. And every time it rained, oh my God, it was a mess. It was sticky, messy. And then there was another big hump of granite down there. I can remember these damn things. And the guy that used to buy the clams, he would back his truck down there, step van, and he used to scare the pants off us at the beginning of the war. We'd say to him at the end of the summer, His name was Brownie. Brownie, we'll see you next year. And Brownie would say, you're not going to see anybody next year. The Germans are going to take over. Scare us little guys. Well, normally the clammers would park up there in that, where the mucky was, except that when it was dry, it was fine. But I can vividly remember the clammers coming in, rolling down their hip boots, and then one of the guys that had already come in early, the guy would get up on the running board, hook his hands in through the window in the roof of the car, and get a ride up to the area that was right across from the original Build-A-Big store, right where Bob and Cheryl Austin and I are right now. The clammers didn't have any trailers. They had old boats, dories, skiffs, whatever and they all rowed over right across to the main flats, rowed over. It was great. When they come back in, get their clams out, off they go, and all they did was give the boat a shove, throw the anchor out, and there it would be. It was like music at night. You just boom, 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 each other, wonderful. My sister and I used to sit out. Oh, by the way, there was no wall there. There was no patio out there to the right of John and Christine's place. Just the grant, and we would sit out there and watch these guys. We knew all the clammers by first name. We actually had a clammers named like the Viking explorer, Leif Erikson. I swear to God, he had no skin. He was just leather. He had been out in the sun so damn long. It was wonderful. Louis Maniatis was out there. He eventually became the Essex clam warden at one time. And his cousin from Ipswich, Angelo Pappas, was there. And there was a Story, and there was a Burnham, and all the other names in town. And out there. You come around the corner. Oh, by the way, I ought to stop. The house beside me. The reason I have such a good sized side yard, there was a house in there. Relatives of the deceased, a fellow by the name of Napur, and his son-in-law, Jack Gallagher, one night was down there. Unfortunately, he was feeding the stove through his side. His logs were too long. He was shoving them in, he burned the end, and then he shoved the rest of it in. Unfortunately, he either fell asleep or passed out, one of the two, and it's the only time I know that we ever lost a body in a fire down here. And so Jack went to heaven, I hope. You went around the corner, you looked up, and the marsh is working its way out. Not then. It was back in, almost non-existent, and you walked around in the sand and the mud towards Sisk, the front of Sisk, and there was a little rock formation there. We used to call it the Junior Crab Island. And then you came to Grampy's Pier, and it was Grampy's Pier. He was the one that Grampy Farnsworth Pier. He was the one that built it. The three houses, the first three there, now Lear and Paul and Charlotte's and now Jeff Lawler's. The three of them had porches that were right, the porches were connected. You could walk on all three porches, right, without going down the stairs. Yeah, that was cool. I like that. I saw a picture once, I have no idea where it is. Well, forget Grampy for the moment. Although he started the sailboat races from his, right beside his house. He had a big siren under the house. Pull it out for race day. You could hear it. It was fun. And then between the main pier and Grampy's Pier, of course, is Crab Island. Believe it or not, after, right at the end of World War II and at the start of the late 40s there was big talk about we were going to create and the Ansquam Yacht Club on Crab Island. In other words, we're gonna run on stilts right out from the road, over the top of Crab Island, and we're gonna have this big yacht club building out there. You don't see it today. Yeah, ka-ching, ka-ching. I think that's what happened. And then the main pier. Main pier was interesting. It had either one or two long ones, I can't remember. And I think, and there were logs down the outside. There were no tubs, there was no styrofoam. There were two big logs down there. They might have been telephone poles for all I know. But at high tide, all us kids used to, you know, over the side, we'd go underwater and come up underneath, and we would stand there, talk to each other, and that was fun. And then the bridge, they were both made out of wood, heavy as sin. Well, not any more heavier than those aluminum things that my son-in-law built. But anyway, you went out to the T-float. There was only one T-float. The bridge, one T-float. It had, for a long time, it had a manila mat over the whole thing. That was supposed to stop you from sliding back and forth, blah, blah, blah. At one end, we actually had a monster diving board. Big, great big coils. I have to stop once in a while. God, I'm losing my breath here. That's the way it was when I was diving off that damn thing. And you could actually dive at low tide. There was that much water there at that point. Well, once the coils gave out, we put a smaller board in, and then the water started getting a little more shallow at low tide. So, excuse me, it was a board that you could roll back, you could chain it down, so you couldn't use it again until the tide came back in. I had a couple of stories for you down there. What was it? Oh yeah, my boss was. I got hired. Now you got to get certified, and you're certified for 2 years. The first time I got hired, I was 14 years old. I wasn't even 16 yet to get certified, if there even was any. But down I was at the pier, first lifeguard after World War II, and maybe first lifeguard ever, I don't know. But anyway, my boss was Frank Lane. That would be Ginger and Heidi's grandfather. And he was my mentor around there. I didn't realize how much I learned from him until a heck of a lot later. But he would sit up there, and they still have, says Marge Lane, they still have the cheerleaders megaphone that he would sit up on the porch. And I'd be down there, and there'd be 10 or 15 people in the water. And all of a sudden, Bobby, come up here, I need you. And I'd say, I can't go, I got people in the water. Come up here, right now. You know? And up I'd go, and he'd say, I just wanted to tell you that when you finish at 5 o'clock, come up, I'm going to show you how to splice a line. He was my mentor. We had, I don't know if you, probably a lot of people do remember when we had the Sambotis, the group up there at the conference center. Well, they came down one day, and well, I don't know if they were. I think they were from a different area.
Yeah, they were colors of the sun.
Okay, thank you. Is this it? Did you put the vodka in there, John? That's good. Well, anyway, down they came in there, and they wore either red or orange or yellow. I don't remember. I know that I was teaching over at Conomo at that time, and I had on my Masco red, you know, my sweats and red, and I'd go up there through the conference center, and they'd actually come out and shake their fists at me. Well, one day they came down in their robes, and they're over on the rocks to the left of our pier. And there was about 4 or 5, 6 of them. And they stripped off the robes, had nothing on underneath, nothing. And into the water they went. All of a sudden, the little girls that were down on the pier, and pretty soon the mother's at water, you gotta do something. You gotta walk over there and tell them they can't do that. Okay, you guys watch the pier, I'll walk over. Well, they saw me coming, and God love them, they came out of the water. My eyes were really good in them. They came out of the water and put the robes on, and I said, you know, this is really a family-oriented place. I said, you really shouldn't do this, you know. And the one guy who I assume is the boss man there, he just nodded, no one didn't said a word, and off they went, and then started coming down at night. I don't have good night vision, so I never went back. I don't remember any flagpoles. I don't think the flagpole was at the top of the pier. I don't think certainly the benches along there were there. I don't think the lane's flagpole was there, the little garden around the flag. No, I don't think so. Down at the very end, there was a house there that was owned during World War II and before and after. That was owned by Spencer family. And if you remember Beth Jones, her mother was Janet Spencer. Then you come along to right here, where we are, the boathouse. All right. The reason that we have such big timbers here is the boathouse. Grampy Farnsworth owned it. Eventually, he gave it to Conomo Point Association. But this is where the boathouse ended. Then he added a couple of spots later, the rest of it later on. There used to be water, running water down in the left-hand corner down there, only cold. The ladies didn't like that because we had bean suppers, probably 3 or 4 a summer. And you would bring your own silverware, and we had all these light green dishes. I mean, we had tons of them. We stopped using them, of course, and they went to heck and gone. Anything that was left that was good, we kind of gave it away if anyone wanted it. I had people, what the hell would I want that for? That type of thing. But they used to pull a couple of big boats up here. Grampy Farnsworth had a 22-foot boat called the Alice. That came in here, and a lot of people kind of remember Ted Herson's and eventually Jan Smith's Seaclam. That was an interesting. They had a little back cuddy cabin that had the engine in it, so it wasn't anything you could go in. But the whole boat was just seats up and down. Wonderful boat. It's up on Walker Creek in a shed. I don't think it's going to float again. What else? Oh yeah, there's rails out in back. If you've ever looked, and you put the boat on the cradle out in back, and then these damn things were heavy. And so here's a rope from the cradle all the way through, out the front door here, you know, put the sliders back, out the front door, over to a big pulley tied onto the tree that's right across. Through the pulley, and tied it to a car over here, and up the road he'd go. You know? And of course, you don't see any rails in here. They were temporary, so you had to make sure you had them in the right place so you could get these 2 big boats up here. Again, great times. Love to sit here and watch it forever. You come around we're almost at the end of Conomo Point Road. And as you come down over the back hill, go past the Davis's porch, and then almost down to my driveway just before you get to Steve and Andrea's place there. And if you just when the road starts to turn a little bit, if you put your hand out, even with Beach Circle on the other side, that's where Conomo Point Road used to be. There it went. My father was always complaining. He says, I'm getting charged for lot 66 and half of 64. What the heck? So for years, we paid for something on the other side after they moved the road. We paid for half a lot on the other side. Of course, in those days, you know what the land rent was for us? $75. But there it was, and here we are. It's been a great
Do you have any stories about the tower?
About the tower.
The yellow tower?
The
octagon.
As the octagon, well, the family that was in there was King Cass and his wife. That would be Brian's grandfather. King had, I had to tell you a little bit of the Conomo Point Yacht Club, because we were a busy group. But King Cass we had 15-foot boats called fish cat boats. They were made by Montgomery Boatyard, which today is under 128 over there on the river, the Anscombe River. And he built them over there. He had a cement mold. It's in the same place that it was in the 30s when they started building those things. It must weigh a ton. I don't know, but it's in the same place today. They don't even use it. They haven't used it for years and years and years. There is a great grandson that's over there, and he's still building some of those in Annisquam. Still purchases some, but they started building them back in the early 30s, and Overpride was he bought the first one for Conomo Point, and it was instead of putting the digits in order on the mainsails, he decided he was going to start C1, and that's what he did. C2 was the Leroy's redfish, and C3 was Skeet and Buster Richardson. I knew them all. King Cass had one. But when he used this mold, this cement mold, to put the boat together, he used nails. And eventually, you know what happens to those nails? They're gone. And his boat started leaking a lot. And King decided that he was going to put copper stripping on the seams. That'll stop it. It didn't. And so one day he came to me and he says, you can keep whatever you want off the boat. But he said, will you get rid of the hull? Again, I didn't know you were supposed to get permission to have any burn, but I pulled it up on the back of the boathouse over here in one of the ditches and poured gasoline over it, set it afire. But I ended up with a mast and a boom and a sail and brought it to the whole 9 yards. The best boat in the fleet was Kendall Spence's Marlin C5, and he used to, we had a little, not a newspaper, a little pamphlet. It wasn't very big, maybe 5 by 7, something like that. It was called the Conomo Clamor, and it came out 4 times a year, and you would get information. I mean, you could read, the kids have gone off to college. Bud Cupperson went somewhere, Aunt Sis went, and Joy Biddle went to Goucher College, and I had it all in the news. But Kendall had articles in there on how to tune a sailboat. Man, we read that like clam flats were so low in those days. There was no marsh on top. Cranes Beach hadn't started coming in, and in our races, they had two markers at the start of Walker Creek, and we had one on the other side. So if we had a low tide race, there were always 2 markers you could start with it. And then you would go down past Dilly's almost to the sand dunes, and you'd tack up to down there by Coles Island and back in again. Well, the first year, there was one more boat, the C6. That was the Ringers, and they lived where Sarah Cushing lives today. Marilyn Ringer, and she used to race her boat, Pumping. And then I came along with C7, the Sailfish, and I was a real rookie and I was real young. And I would get out there, and like I said, there was no race committee at the starting line. It's Grampy up there with the friggin' siren. And the siren would go off. First is the warning, then 3 minutes later the preparatory, and then the start 3 minutes after that. And we'd start, and all of a sudden somebody like Bud Leroy or Buster Richardson or somebody would say, Bobby, you're over the line, you gotta go back and start again. Okay. That fall, my father said, here's a copy of the rule. You might want to study this for next year. I went back the next year, the sirens go off I go, and overpriced says, Bobby, you're over the line, you gotta go back. No, you wanna protest me? You protest me. Yeah, we had a good time. We had at one time, quite a few of them. I think we worked our way up to about 18 of those damn things, 15 feet. We had a lot of fun. A lot of people from West Gloucester joined. Anyway, a lot of people. And we had another class, the 16-foot catboard class, that had a gaff rig arrangement. The Mitney, the Lane's Mitney is a classic example, although they've modified it a little bit with the bowsprit. But that's the kind it was. And then we had something called the open class. And anything that wasn't one of those two raced in the open class. And we'd get 10 or 12 of them out there at the same time. There'd be snipes out there, there'd be, Marblehead had a boat called the Brutal Beast, that was out there. There was 2 town class, there was a bunch of them. And we had a lot of fun. The island had a boat called the Spook. I don't know what class it was. I'm sure it was homemade. Haven Emerson, that would be Jack's son by his first wife. He was my age, and we'd go out and race that thing with not much success. Jack McKenna, who lived in the house on the end of Conomo Lane, Scott and Nancy are up there now. He had a boat called the National Wonder. Oh, there was a bunch of them out there, and we had a good time. We also had two low tide courses. We followed the channel out to the belt, and I was going to say the green belt, except in those days the red nuns were still red, but the green cans that we have now, they were black. And I would assume that because it was hard to see against the water sometimes that they changed that too. But anyway, I would go to the black belt, turn around, come back in. We had another course that took forever. You had to bring something to drink, you had to bring something to eat. You'd go up to the black belt, and then the next mark was the Ipswich Red off of Cranes Beach down at the end, and then back into the Red Nun at the start of it, and then back in. That was a 3.5 hour trip. Then we got a class called we had a class of light geese for a while, 19 feet. So did Annisquam. Well, I devised this, I said, you know what? We can't set up any classes for them outside the mouth of the river. So I said, what we'll do, we'll start at Conomo Point. We'll go down the river, and then once we get to our black belt, I said, we'll pick out a couple of the Annisquam marks, and we'll go to them. And that's what we did. Unfortunately, we picked the day that Annisquam was coming out, going in the opposite direction from us. And there's Senator Smith. Ben Smith he took Kennedy's place when Kennedy went to the White House. And Ben, I said, oh Jesus, we're in trouble. We're going to the same mark with this. And sure enough, he's glaring at me as I go by. He's pointing his face. He says, once again, I'm calling your mother. I never said anything about calling my dad. I didn't So that was that. What else was there? I can't think of anything else. So there was some characters there. My wife's trying to tell me something. Oh, I thank you, dear. Glad I have you around. That's why I didn't tell you the story about going to the senior prom. I knew she was here. Yeah, during Eddie Pride, and there was a family that lived in Nina's place, or Ed's place over here. The Cochran boys, Jack and Bobby Cochran, and then Jack McKenna up at the end of Conomo Lane. I guess that was it. I don't know. And Eddie Pride the Prides had a 16, 17-foot boat called the Dodge Watercar, and it was just a speedboat, a little Vanna speedboat. Well, at the end of World War II, just before it was over, all of a sudden, one of these big Liberty ships from World War II, and I'm talking, you know, bigger than our little 16-footer, it probably was a couple of 100 feet long, I don't know. But it went aground and toward the bottom out, right behind the breakwater over in Rockport. And so we used to go out there in the water car, and they had the rope ladder over the side, and we'd climb on. It was scary. You could hear the water sloshing around. And so we went through, and the lobstermen had already been out there, practically stripped the thing clean. But we had fun. I remember once we came back with a ton of tanks with Freon gas. I sold them to Jack Emerson. Wow, the 5 of us, we each had $100. We were living. That was really great. We brought back some lockers, and we brought back. They had brand new gallons and gallons and gallons of paint. We brought a lot of stuff back like that. But yeah, we would go out there and do that. That was good. Well,
Bobby,
that's it.
Bob, I've heard a lot about you teaching my husband and the Davises and Lanes how to swim. You were teaching them how to swim, Rick and John and Chris. And
I've got a picture at home, and I see that the date on it is 1964. And it was does anyone remember the Cape Ann Summer Sun? That was part of the Boston Daily Times, but it had its own. It looked like the Boston Herald. It was about the same size. And I picked it up one day, and there's Carol Menges, Philip's aunt. She was teaching swimming. I was teaching sailing, and we'd alternate morning and afternoon on the lifeguard. And there we were, hot-tailing across the Essex Bay in a GP-14, which came from England, and I forget who the heck owned that, but it wasn't either Carol or I can tell you. Yeah, I did a lot of Rick Davis. Rick, you here?
Yes, I am.
That's you talking?
My wife.
Hi, Ginny.
Hi.
Rick swears I taught him how to swim.
Yes, he does,
And
yeah.
don't worry, anyone that tells me I did something, I'm going to believe it. But, the recollection is getting a little shady. But there you go. Yeah, it was fun. You know, and then we had our sad times too. I remember one time teaching sailing, we decided to, now they sail to farms once a year, but we decided we were going to sail all the way to Essex, and we were going to go over to Woodman's and have lunch. But we decided we'd tie up at the restaurant. Now it's the Pearl, but it was called Callahan's then. And so I've got 10 girls and Rick Scheidemann with me. That was the class, and we all tie up there. Wow, Mr. Callahan come roaring out of there. Well, you don't let us park on your land down there, Conomo Point. You're not get the hell off of here. You know, ooh, it was scary. Good times. Well, that's it.
Thank you.
Just one more thing. You may have started something here. I see I've got some little notes on my back. No. But oh, never mind, there's the senior moment kicking in. That's it, that's all sure.
We love you.
Maybe you're gonna see it on video one of these days.
Absolutely.